Good morning, everyone. My name is Heather Amick. Looks like we're right on the dot right now, so I think we can get started with our webinar. Thanks for joining us today. I hope everyone is having a good day so far. We're excited to get started. Welcome to Business Systems Cybersecurity. CMMC is here. Now what? We have a great turnout today, it looks like, and we're really excited to exchange information and share ideas. My name is Heather Amick. I'm a senior accountant at SingerLewak. I've been working as an accountant with companies who contract with the federal government for the past 6 years, and I'm currently serving as the treasurer of the NCMA San Fernando Valley chapter. I'll be your moderator today, and so I will be doing a few introductions of our panel. We have quite a few people here today. We have a panel of people that can be resources to answer questions, and then we also have speakers for today. So on our panel, I'd like to introduce Bill Foster. He's the Director of Contracts at DCMA, Southern California. He's a seasoned professional with over 30 years of experience with various departments of defense organizations. Mr. Foster served 26 years in the United States Air Force in various operational systems research, development, and staff contracting positions. He has served in various leadership positions with NCMA since 1996 and is currently a member of the San Fernando Valley chapter in North Los Angeles. He loves sharing his knowledge of government contracting. Next is Andrea Roschke, CPA. She's a partner of SingerLewak in the Business Solutions Group and also has many years of experience with accounting with government contractors. She's currently serving as president of the San Fernando Valley chapter of the NCMA. Next, we have Renee Meredith. She's the contracts manager at Rantac Microwave Systems. They're a small business manufacturer of navigational antennas sold to prime contractors and subcontractors, primarily to the Department of Defense, MDA, and NATO. Renee is the president-elect and secretary of the San Fernando chapter of the NCMA. We also have Kim Wall, and Kim Wall is also with she's also a partner with SingerLewak in the Business Solutions Group and has many years of experience with government contracting. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a couple housekeeping items. I'd like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded. At this time, please check that your microphone is muted. If you have any questions or having technical difficulties, please post it in the chat and I'll be checking the chat to make sure that there aren't any issues. If you have any questions, you can also put those in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat as we go along and we'll address those as we can. We also offer CPE certificates today. You have to be present for a minimum of 50 minutes in order to meet the time requirements. And anyone that's interested, we will be emailing those out to participants who qualify afterwards. So at this time, I'd like to hand it off to our presenters, Carl Grifka and Eric Walkwell.
Great. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. Right. In terms of my background, so my name Carl Grifka. I'm a managing director at SingerLewak in our cybersecurity practice. I have an interesting background working at large public accounting firms, large Fortune 500 companies, and also working with kind of mid-market companies throughout their growth cycle, right? Specializing in both business process and cybersecurity internal controls. Eric.
Thank you, Carl. Eric Rockwell, lead cybersecurity advisor at SingerLewak. And I've been working in the defense industrial base for almost 20 years as a defense contractor and also working with defense contractors. So I'm happy to be here today and excited to talk about CMMC.
Perfect. Right. And as we mentioned the title, CMMC is now here, guys. So it is now the rubber, as they say, is hitting the pavement.
Yes, great. Now what?
Yes, absolutely. So some of our learning objectives, right? So we're going to go through what the definition is of cyber, how that relates to CMMC, and how this relates to companies, not just your primes, but all of those companies working in the defense industrial base, of which there's hundreds of thousands here in the United States. We're going to walk through the requirements of CMMC. Once again, what you need to comply with. We have a slide that Eric's going to walk through that kind of compares the various frameworks and what you can expect, right, with CMMC as an example. And then we're going to walk through some of the recent developments and kind of a roadmap, right, of what you need to do. Yeah. So once again, perfect here. So what's the definition of cybersecurity? Once again, that is the underpinning of what CMMC is here to kind of manage within the defense industrial base. And cybersecurity is really the combination of people, process, and technology that the company is basically using to protect its data. Think of your cyber assets. And once again, we're going to kind of align our cybersecurity based upon risk, business risk, and really it's the responsibility of management, which we'll get to here in a second, to make sure that cybersecurity is addressed. And what is CMMC mandating? That you're going to need a cybersecurity program that's operating effectively, right? So that's the ongoing set of activities that we're going to use to basically identify, detect, respond, recover, and protect our company from cybersecurity vulnerabilities, risks, and threats. And the objective of the program, go back to what we call the CIA triad. We want to make sure that our data is kept confidential, so only those that should be able to access it can. We want to make sure our data has integrity, right? So nobody's altering it or destroying it that shouldn't, and that our data is available, right? So when I need it, I can get to it on demand. And I kind of already alluded to the fact that who is responsible for cybersecurity and the program in your organization? It is business management's responsibility, right? To set the program based on the level of business risk. Where does IT come in? They're responsible to implement the program. Any comments on this, Eric, before I move to the next?
Nope, you did great.
Perfect, great. All right, next one here, guys. Once again, cybersecurity, and we see this all too often. Eric and I were on a call yesterday where this reared its ugly head again. But once again, cybersecurity is a living and ongoing process where we're going to measure our maturity and our risk posture, think larger risk management. Even if you're a smaller company in the defense industrial base, or you're thinking about getting into the defense industrial base, you've got to start somewhere, right? We're going to walk through what some of those first steps can be. You should be on an ongoing basis measuring your progress, right? You need to, on an ongoing basis, look at your capabilities. If you have gaps, designing a remediation plan, and you should be consistently redesigning and improving your defense based on your risk posture. And if you already have a program, which most of you on this call probably do, great. But what are you doing to objectively measure your gaps in your current state, and two, improving it to meet your desired risk of defense? And once again, CMMC is going to help us mandate what some of those minimum levels are. Any questions here or comments here, Eric?
Only that CMMC, like any information security program, is not a one-time event. It is not a once a year or once every 3-year event. It's an independent third-party assessment and attestation of the program, but the program is ongoing, and it is not a once a month or once a year thing.
Yeah, think of a car, right? You have to do routine maintenance on your car. If you don't perform that routine maintenance, maybe your car doesn't break down tomorrow, but over a long enough period of time, your car is going to be unsafe. Same thing for cyber. I may have designed and implemented a program to mitigate my risk today, but there are new vulnerabilities, your business processes change. Over a long enough period of time, you become quite, unfortunately, insecure. All right, so we're going to go into the first polling question. And once again, for the polling question today, for this webinar, just in the chat, input A, B, C, D, or E. We'll have different options for each polling question, but we just want to understand who's in the room, right? So what function do you represent within your company? Are you in like the internal audit staff, or are you an auditor? Do you work in IT operations or cyber? Are you kind of like overall risk management and governance? Do you work in finance, right? Finance decision maker, or do you work somewhere else within the organization? And I can't see the responses come in because I'm sharing my screen. Eric and Andreas, if you can give me the high level.
Yeah, a lot of C's, a lot of D's.
Yeah.
It's funny, the last webinar that Carl and I did on this topic, there were 0 people from finance, and today there's a lot, so that's cool.
Yep.
I see a lot of E's also.
Haven't noticed any auditors yet.
By the way, for those that are answering E, if you can let us know what that is. I'm just curious. Like supply chain, possibly. Like I'm just curious where that would be.
Facilities. Yep.
Legal, CEO.
Wow. CEO is definitely a top governance for sure.
Senior program managers.
Right.
Contracts.
Yeah.
CIO.
All right.
And we have
Okay.
one question in the Q&A. I don't know if you want to take that now or wait.
Well, what's the question? I guess we'll take it now.
How will CMMC be impacted due to the recent mass federal employee layoffs across multiple agencies?
It's a great question, and I don't know that it will. In fact, the current administration just hired somebody that was in charge during their previous administration when CMMC was first put on the table. So I don't see it slowing down. If anything, I see it speeding up.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Are all cybersecurity programs the same? Eric, I'll let you take this one.
Yes, the answer is, of course, no. All threat landscapes are different. All businesses use different business systems. Sometimes when we're doing an initial security assessment, Carl and I will come across a organization that has maybe 3 to 5 business systems in ERP. They've got some local file sharing infrastructure, some cloud infrastructure, but it's pretty tight. Other times we'll come across organizations that have 50 different business systems. Everyone's doing something different. So the landscape is different. The scope is different. The program has similar controls. The program comes from one framework, but we have to make sure that it's adapted and appropriate for the organization's size and posture.
So big picture, you should be tailoring your program, one, based on the legal requirements, but also based on your operations and business risk.
And confidential information.
100%. 100%. All right. So what is CMMC and why is it important? So CMMC was developed by the Department of Defense, right, to align with their information security requirements for those in the defense industrial base. So once again, your primes and all the subs. It's designed to enforce the protection of sensitive unclassified information. So we're going to call this controlled unclassified information. You'll hear us call it CUI, CUI. And this program at the end of the day was to help the DoD get some assurance that all this controlled, unclassified but controlled data, as it's being used by all these contractors, think 300,000 plus companies in the defense industrial base, that they have some level of comfort that that data is protected, right? Because it is important for national security. And who's subject to this? I kind of alluded to it already. The more than 300,000 companies in the defense industrial base that support the defense of the United States, and this includes companies for R&D. They're developing things, right? They're manufacturing things. They may be part of the acquisition arm. They're producing, basically, or just generally within the supply chain. So if you're supporting the defense industrial base and you're interacting with that data, this controlled unclassified information, there's a high likelihood you're going to be subject to CMMC, right? Yep. And then next slide here. Some of the key features of the program, right, including some of the assessment requirements that are now coming into place now. And we'll get into timing in a future slide. But once again, this is a tiered model, right? So based on the type of information and the sensitivity of that information that you as a prime or subcontractor are working with will define the level of CMMC that you need to comply with, right? And that can go from just federal contract information all the way through controlled unclassified information that can be quite sensitive, right? We're going to have a slide, and that's coming up next, and that's going to show what some of the assessment requirements are, right? So some, depending on the level of information, you may be able to do what's called a self-assessment. You may have to get an assessment from a third party that's licensed called a 3PAO, Or you might need to be, if it's level 3, which we'll get to here in a second, if it's very sensitive, you may need to get an audit triennially or every 3 years from the DIB CAC itself, right? And then once again, this is implemented through contracts, right? Because once again, this is the defense industrial base. So the contractors and subcontractors handling this information. The information, the level of CMMC that you need to comply with is going to be luckily specified in the contract as a condition of award. And in terms of what level, there are reasons, if we have questions, by the way, there are some reasons that drive what's specified in the contract. But just keep in mind, you don't have to guess. The level that you need to comply with will be specified in the award. Yep. And then I'll introduce
by the way,
this one.
sorry, Carl, I think that's a really, really important point. And I think a lot of people that I've spoken to have missed that. The certification requirements or self-assessment requirements will be stated in the contract. Here.
Absolutely. Perfect. Next here. So I'll introduce Eric and I'll let you take it away. So this is the slide. We got a lot of this information. You'll see we sourced it right to the Department of Defense CIO office. But these are the models, right? The levels within the CMMC model that are required for compliance. So I'll kind of walk through and I'll let Eric kind of get into the details. But we have the different levels based on the information that you're interacting with that'll be specified in the award. We have the control requirements, so the number of controls and where you're going to get them. And then the attestation requirements based on the level. Eric, I'll let you get into the details on this one.
That's right. If the contract specifies a CMMC level 1 requirement, that's a self-assessment. And what you're doing is looking at the minimum security controls required by the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation. Those same controls are a part of NIST 800-171 and required for levels 2 and 3 also. Level 2 might be allowed to have a self-assessment for now, but the whole point of level 2 is that an independent third party is going to come in and conduct the assessment. That's a C3 PAO. And that is a review of all 110 controls that are published in NIST 800-171. So the audit is aligned with NIST 800-171. There are additional requirements outside of the 110. And then level 3 has those same 110 requirements plus an additional 24 from NIST 800-172. That requires a DIBCAC assessment, a Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center assessor, and annual affirmation. So what types of, what are the types of protected information? So for CMMC level 1, that's going to be required to protect federal contract information, FCI. For level 2, that's going to be required for controlled unclassified information, or CUI. And one thing that we're already seeing is that large primes are, as they do with secret information, they're over marking documents as CUI. So it's very likely that we're going to see lots of documents marked as CUI, and that might tighten up over time. But historically, with secret information, it's overclassified. I expect that we'll probably see that for some time in the future. And there's lots of examples of CUI, and not all CUI is equal. Some CUI has additional requirements on top, such as naval nuclear propulsion data or ITAR restricted data, anything that's export controlled. But a common example of CUI is technical drawings that might flow from a prime like Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman down to a sub that's manufacturing a widget, and they have to share those technical drawings with the sub so they can have the specs for the widget and then sell the widgets back to the prime, and the prime sells that to the Department of Defense. Okay, assessment overview, level 2 and beyond. The CMMC program provides assessments at 3 levels. We already covered that. We talked about the self-assessment at level 1. Level 2 is the broad protection of CUI, and that again requires, for now, either a self-assessment as listed in the contract or a C3 PAO assessment every 3 years. The affirmation is annual, and compliance verification with all 110 security requirements is required at least annually. For most of our clients, we perform that assessment on a quarterly basis. Again, that's Control 3.12 in NIST 800-171. And Level 3 has additional requirements from NIST 800-172, and it's the actual Defense Industrial Bases Cybersecurity Assessment Center, the DIBCAC, that conducts that assessment every 3 years. Again, an annual affirmation verifying compliance with the additional 24 requirements in NIST 800-172 is required.
Well, kind of a key point here that Eric mentioned, right? Whether for level 2, which is going to be probably the majority of those are in the defense industrial base, right? It's specified in your solicitation which level you need to meet. And even within level 2, you'll see it's a self-assessment, or you need to get assessed by an independent C3 PAO. Once again, that'll be in your solicitation. But what drives the difference within level 2, interestingly, is whether or not the CUI is published within the National Archives Registry Defense and Organizational Index grouping. So once again, you're not responsible to know that. But just for background, if it's published in that defense index grouping, then it will be in the solicitation that you need the C3 PAO to assess you. If it's CUI that's outside of that, then they should be including in the solicitation that it is just a self-assessment. So kind of an interesting background as to what within the same level, whether you can assess yourself or you need a third party to independently assess.
Yep. Okay, so CMMC became effective on 16 December. It's 32 CFR Part 170, Title 48 CFR, CMMC. So there's a timeline that we have documented here. And right now we're in phase 1 of the initial implementation. So that's where applicable, solicitations will require the level 1, 2, or 2 self-assessment in the contract. Phase 2 begins 12 months after phase 1, so we're going to see that at the end of the year. And that's where we'll see solicitations requiring the level 2 certification. Again, I can tell you that as of last week, I've already seen the self-assessment for level 2 required in contracts from the DoD. Phase 3 begins 24 months after phase 1, so almost 2 years from now, and where applicable, we're going to see the level 3 certification requirement. And phase 4 is full implementation, 36 months after 16 December. All solicitations and contracts will include CMMC requirements, level 1, 2, or 3, as a condition of the contract award.
Great insight.
It's possible this timeline will change, but this is the published timeline as of today.
Yeah, and good point, Eric. You know, this has been a very fluid last couple of years with changes and final rules coming into place. So this is the law of the land as of today. But as we're seeing in the macro level environment, laws can change. So, but we basically have to plan and structure our company based on what the law is today and what will be. So until there's changes, we definitely want to follow this timeline.
Exactly. So this is a really good graph here showing different certifications and control frameworks, regulations, etc. All of these frameworks or regulations address information security. Cybersecurity is a subset of information security. We can see right in the middle, a very common certification is ISO 27001 and 2. We can also see the CIS controls. We can see NIST 800-171 to the right, almost aligned with the NIST 853 moderate baseline. This is where we're getting into FedRAMP. We can see the moderate and high baselines for FedRAMP there. And below ISO 27001, which is a moderate, which is considered moderate cyber coverage, we can see PCI DSS for protecting cardholder data, credit card holder data, HIPAA. That's pretty aligned with the NIST 853 low baseline. And under minimal, we can see the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is really the bare minimum for protecting any confidential information. One thing that's not shown here is an SSAE SOC 2 Type 2, and I can tell you from experience that's between minimal and moderate coverage. Would you agree with that, Carl?
Yeah, I mean it's very controls based, right? Processing control. So I would 100% agree with you.
So what does this mean for all of us? It means that CMMC will be more robust than SOC 2, PCI, and ISO, but similar to ISO, the auditing process will be very similar.
Yeah, but just which framework are you auditing against, right? The AICPA kind of publishes the SOC 2 Type 2, very process and control heavy, versus here we really get into a lot of the configurations, right? So a little bit more granular.
Yeah, and with CMMC and ISO, you get to control the scope. You do that with SOC also, but in SOC 2, there's a lot more flexibility in the control language, and I would say that with CMMC, it's a lot more prescriptive. Would you agree with that, Carl?
Correct. Yes.
So this is the path to CMMC 2.0, and it doesn't matter if we're level 1, 2, or 3. It starts with a gap assessment, and after you've identified the gaps, you write a system security plan articulating how the controls that are operational are actually operating. You articulate how the controls with nonconformities are intended to operate, and you work on a remediation plan, a plan of action with milestones to mitigate the weaknesses. You document accountability, you document dates, you manage against that. You continue to update the system security plan as the controls that are deficient become operational. You reassess on a regular basis. And once ready, you conduct a self-assessment. You then move into third-party assessment. You optimize any additional nonconformities that come out of that assessment. And you go back to your internal gap assessment and gap remediation. This is a process that never ends. And even if there are no gaps, the system security plan, the SSP, will continue to need to be updated over time.
Same reason you get an inspection on your car and you do your routine maintenance, right? This is a process, cybersecurity risk, your operations change over time. So doing that
Right.
gap assessment on an ongoing basis periodically is very important. You identify what's wrong, same with a car. I remediate what's wrong. And then I continue to optimize. I want to get to where I say that we're based on, one, I'm meeting the framework, and two, meeting my business risk, where I'm basically mitigating my risk to what's called an acceptable level. And once again, that minimum level is going to be compliance with the framework based on the type of data that you're working with as specified in the solicitation.
Exactly.
I know
We have a couple
mouthful,
more.
but
We have a couple more questions. I don't know if you want to address those now.
it's a good time, I think, before we get into some more of the requirements.
Okay, great. I have two here, so I'll read the first one. Are there FAR, DFAR flow down clauses to subcontractors that should be included in subcontract purchase orders?
Yeah, good question. So those purchase orders should state the DFARs or FAR requirements. Again, if it's sharing federal contract information, then the FAR applies. If the prime or your customer is going to be sharing CUI, they need to specify that in their contracts with you. If they haven't already started doing so, they probably will. And with some of our clients that are more mature, that are level 2 assessment ready, they've already gone through audits of their supply chain and have started asking their subcontractors for evidence of compliance with DFARs and the FAR.
So you got slightly ahead of us. That was literally our next slide. So we'll put it up here. What's the next question?
Okay, the other question is, there's actually two parts to it, sorry. Does the assessment need to be in place by the time the response to the solicitation is submitted or by the time of the award? That's part one. And how long would a C3PAO assessment level 2 take?
So I'll answer both questions first. The latter, I've seen this process take 90 days thus far, and I expect that will probably speed up a little bit, but 90 days is probably how long the process will take for the foreseeable future. And these requirements have actually already been in contracts for quite some time, because the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, DFARS, is more than 5 years old. I think it's from 2017. It's been revised a few times, but the DFARS clause 252-204 TAC 7012, which requires the implementation of the NIST 800-171 controls, has been in place for quite some time, and that has already been in contracts for years.
And that's a key insight, right? So you'll see a lot of the practitioners, right, in this space. This isn't a surprise. These are controls that people should already have in place. I guess to your question in terms of enforcement, I mean, by the time of the award, right, it's got to be in place, but these should already have been put into place long ago. Would you say that's correct, Eric?
Exactly. Yeah. And really where the DoD is going, it's a regulation, it's required, and in the future, people are then going to have to prove it.
It's really the enforcement of things you should already be doing. Did you want to cover anything else on this slide? I think we kind of covered it with the question, but if you had anything else, Eric, you wanted to add.
This is the new DFARS clause 7021, and this is the clause that requires the contractor or subcontractor to develop artifacts and deliverables, conduct self-assessments, or require the C3PAO or DIBCAC to perform the certification, complete the annual affirmation, and continually report that to the military's supplier performance risk system, SPUR, and flow the DFARS clause down to subcontractors. And again, that's a key point. We've already talked about that, but in order to attest to level 2, you should have already gone through and assessed all of the subcontractors that either have the ability to store or process CUI, are storing or processing your CUI, have access to CUI, or you're sharing CUI with. This includes IT managed service providers that have tools on your assets or have unattended remote access and privileged access to systems that house CUI.
Yep. And by the way, this concept really shouldn't be unique to the defense industrial base. If you have a company, let's say you're not in the defense industrial base and you're on this call, you need to do your cybersecurity should include everybody that's interacting with your data, which by definition includes contractors and then their contractors. So all of the subs, the primed, etc. So this is really just vendor management. And once again, they're enforcing it through the use of these contracts.
And in most of the assessments that Carl and I conduct together with clients, the first time around, the vendor management is like this. Well, no. I just I thought they were doing this. I assumed that everything was fine, but the assumptions lead to unidentified risk, and the whole point here is identifying risk and then doing something about it.
So big picture, what does that mean? I can outsource the process, but not the responsibility, right? So if somebody's interacting with this data, right, controlled data, and it was awarded to me and they're a subcontractor, it's still my responsibility that they're meeting the requirements as well, right? So it's our responsibility as a business to do that. Yep. All right, next polling question. So probably a higher percentage given the membership for this call, but do you have a CUI today, so controlled unclassified information, and the requirements to meet NIST 800-171, either directly, right, or indirectly, right, via these subcontracting agreements? So A for yes, B for no, or C, unsure.
Seeing a lot of A's and a lot of B's. I also saw Y, and I think Y means A.
And for those that are saying no, the question is, are you, is your contract just not specifying that yet, right? And it probably should, or are you thinking about getting into the defense industrial base, at which point you will? Are we good in terms of the answers? Okay. All right, I will move us to the next one. Eric, I'll let you take this one away too.
All right, let's get in the weeds a little bit. So what does all of this mean? Well, first of all, you have to have a written system security plan. And the system security plan articulates your scope, where you're storing CUI, what business systems you're using to store CUI, what business systems you're using to manage your assets, your identity, the identity of your people, etc. And the SSP, the System Security Plan, articulates how these 110 controls operate. There's 14 different areas here. Access control, that's how you authenticate access and allow access, approve access to your confidential and sensitive information, the systems that house CUI. Not just CUI, but you probably want to be protecting your intellectual property also. Anything that the business has internally classified as confidential. We want to make sure that the access control process can identify devices uniquely and humans uniquely. There aren't shared accounts being used. Administrative privileges are segregated from day-to-day user privileges, and privileged accounts that have the ability to create accounts or give somebody access to something aren't being used for day-to-day tasks. Those are the accounts that threat actors are trying to compromise and take advantage of. We want to make sure that everybody in the organization has been trained on how to properly identify CUI and share CUI. We want to make sure that they know what not to do with CUI, like put it in their personal Google Drive or something like that. We want to make sure that the organization has a written information security policy and acceptable use of assets policy, a written incident response plan, and that everyone's been trained on those policies and procedures, and that everyone's gone through the DoD's mandatory CUI handling training and has taken a corresponding test and passed that, has the certificate. We want to make sure that everything that people do in the business systems is auditable. That means that there's an audit log that uniquely identifies what each human did. No shared accounts are being used, like shop, manufacturing, marketing, anything like that. We can uniquely identify all actions of individuals, and nothing is ambiguous. We have non-repudiation. We want to make sure that there's a way to identify abnormalities in audit logs, like somebody logging in from Russia. We want to make sure that all of the assets have been hardened to secure technical implementation guidelines, and that there are controls in place to prevent people from logging in remotely from Russia, as an example. We want to make sure that there's a way to identify nonconformities. If assets have not been hardened to those secure technical implementation guidelines or STIGs, there's a way to identify that. And there's a way to manage that and automate that process moving forward. What does that mean? In English, it means that all of the technology that every business uses is vulnerable out of the box. Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, other cloud systems like ERPs, Dell computers, Windows, it doesn't matter what it is, it's vulnerable. And there's a whole procedure for making it secure. And that procedure needs to be automated, followed, and we need a way to identify gaps and nonconformities with it. We also need to make sure that all remote access and privileged access requires multi-factor authentication. That means that you have something with you other than just a username and password, so that if your password gets compromised, a remote threat actor can't use it. And there's a way to identify those intrusion attempts. And if there is an indicator of compromise, we need to have some sort of intrusion prevention system to revoke the threat actor's access and kick off the incident response plan. The incident response plan needs to be written and tested at least annually, if not more frequently. We want to make sure that maintenance activities like patching systems are being performed, and there's a way to measure that. We also want to make sure that service providers don't have unattended remote access and that their remote access sessions are approved and monitored. That also means that if you have lots of manufacturing equipment, we want to make sure that they don't have non-US persons that have unattended remote access using TeamViewer or another foreign remote control solution to those assets. We want to make sure that everything throughout the organization is encrypted, all media is encrypted at rest, including end-user computing devices. USB portable storage devices are prohibited unless there's a business purpose, and if so, they're inventoried, encrypted, and pre-authorized. We want to make sure that there's a process to background check individuals before they're given access to CUI, make sure that they are US persons, have not been convicted of computer crimes or espionage or something like that, and make sure that the facility has physical security controls in place for to physically protect the business systems that house CUI and any paper CUI that might be printed out, like technical drawings and travelers on the floor, and that information is protected when it's inside of the facility. Facility areas that house CUI are considered secure areas. That's on a diagram. We know how the secure areas are defined and have a physical security policy. And there's monitoring, like surveillance systems, video surveillance systems. There's a policy on how long those logs are stored and when they're reviewed, how they're reviewed. And there's a log of visitors. There's also a log of anyone that was in a secure area, the purpose for being in those secure areas, and a log of who escorted the visitors while they were on site. There are regular risk assessments performed. We do this on a monthly basis for the clients in the defense industrial base that we serve. The risk assessment procedure must include a way to identify vulnerabilities both inside and outside of the environment across the entire threat landscape. And the types of assessments that we're talking about right now are done on a regular basis, at least annually, if not quarterly. And every quarter with our clients, we get together and review security policies, review the SSP, make changes to it, and also reassess whether or not the controls are operational, update plans of action if applicable. We want to make sure that all communications are protected. That means they're encrypted using a type of encryption that's validated by NIST. We also want to make sure that we have a way to prohibit foreign sessions or remote access from anywhere that's not approved. There's a way to identify things like cameras or microphones that might be remotely activated or prevent that from happening. Want to make sure that voice technology is segregated if it's being used on the network, and that all of the assets have the proper anti-malware protection, and we identify vulnerabilities on those assets no matter where they are in the environment and review that on a regular basis. On top of all that, we need a medium assurance security certificate that gets issued every year, every 3 years to the organization or somebody in the organization so that we can report cyber events to the Defense Industrial Base Network, DIBNet, and we document where we're at along the way and report that to SPURS. Each of these 110 controls is assigned a value between either 1, 3, or 5 by the Department of Defense. And whether or not the controls are operational, that calculates a DoD security score. If the controls are not operational, we deduct their point value, 1, 3, or 5, from 110. That gets reported to SPURS along with the system security plan revision number and the completion date of the plan of action. And once our plan of action completion date comes, we need to make sure that we've updated the score to 110 if that's the case, or updated the new completion date of the plan of action.
There's a lot in there, a lot to unpack. If I may, I'll take a step back. If we forget about CMMC for 1 second and just think proper cybersecurity, a proper program to basically manage and mitigate my risk, no CMMC or not, you're going to want to have defined and documented policies. I'm going to do an assessment. I'll have a plan of action, how I'm going to remediate issues. I want to test to make sure I'm compliant with NIST. I need to have an incident response plan. So I think big picture, CMMC is enforcing this, but it's really enforcing what really you should have in place anyway in order to properly mitigate your cyber risk, right? So this one, a big picture, a lot to do, but this is all. These are all things you should do anyway. Perfect. Eric, and I'll hand it over in terms of. I know there's a question on timeline budgeting.
Yeah, certifications are already available, and right now we're seeing an average certification cost of $75,000. We're seeing the average readiness assessment cost of $35,000. This would be through an independent third party. What happens if I wait? Well, that depends. The budget might increase, it might decrease, but this is based on supply and demand. Right now, there is a huge demand for CMMC, and there aren't a lot of C3PAOs out there, so there's low supply. That's driving the cost up. We might see increased costs next year, and we expect to see increased certification requirements in contracts starting in 2026.
Yep, and maybe one concept here on the should I wait. Remember, these are basic cybersecurity hygiene, right? Practices that you should have anyway. Concept number one. And number two, these DFARS requirements were already technically law, right? It's just really enforcing them with the CMMC certification program. So I think, should you wait? Realistically, the answer probably should be no, right? But we understand every organization is going to come to its own conclusion based on tolerance, but there really isn't much of a real business case to wait, really. It's just the longer you wait, typically the worse things become, because your timeline then to become compliant, it just compresses. So I think we got a question. Did I see a hand up?
There was a hand up, but the hand went down, so I'm not sure if that. Oh, okay.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, if you want to ask your question, you can turn on your microphone and ask away.
Can we unmute the person ourselves or no?
No.
I think it's Jagadish. If you can unmute, then we would love to hear a question, or you can type it into the chat as a second option.
Okay, if the company does not have any physical assets or similar data as all employees work remotely and use Google Workspace, how should we address this in the CMMC level 1 or 2 assessment? So if the organization does not have a facility, that's very uncommon. There's usually a facility required for a few other unrelated security clearances, but the framework does allow for alternate work locations. That's the DoD's name for working from home. In terms of not having any physical assets, computers are physical assets. The cloud service providers have to also be certified. So if you're using Google Workspace, that environment has to be hardened. There are certain requirements on the Google licensing that you have to have. All of that will be part of your internal self-assessment process and certification process if you move forward with the certification.
And as it pertains to any cloud applications that you may be storing data, typically they will have, we mentioned a SOC 2 report. You should be able to get one of those, but that report is going to clearly say where their responsibility stops and yours begins. So that would only be kind of one component in your control framework. Yeah.
Same thing with FedRAMP reports.
Yep. Next polling question. We're going to have a couple in a row here. So are you planning, or do you have to become certified via the CMMC framework within the next 2 years? Yes, no, or unsure. Once again, use the chat's fine. And if we can get kind of like even if it's a spot check high level, like what percentage you think things are coming out, that'll be kind of insightful for the next question.
There's a lot of A's.
Yeah.
Let's say 90% A's.
Yeah. I'll give it maybe 15 more seconds and we'll.
There was one other question that popped in about ongoing costs to maintain CMMC level 2. It's getting buried
the ongoing, yeah, that's a common question.
Yeah.
So a couple ways to think about this. There's going to be a combination of people, process, and technology internally required for CMMC level 2, aside from just the certification fees that we mentioned earlier. And that depends on really the scope of your business systems. If they're tight, you have a couple of on-prem environments. They've all been hardened. You only have one cloud service provider or 2 cloud service providers. There's very tight control over the system, good policy hygiene, good enforcement of the policies. Then the cost is going to be on the lower side. If there's 50 different business systems, then the cost really starts to take off. However, typically the cost is less than one full-time than hiring one full-time security professional, which is in the $300,000 to $500,000 per year budget. Would you agree with that, Carl?
Absolutely. Yep. And that determination, once again, that's a cost benefit, but that's why it's important. You do your readiness and you do an assessment so you know what you need to do. So then you can compare apples to apples. I think that's exactly. Kind of a key insight too. Yeah. Yep. Perfect. And then next question, you'll see the lead in. Are you ready today? So we had 90%, off the cuff yeses. So is your company ready to be CMMC certified today now that you have an understanding of what's required based on the type of information, CUI or FCI, that you're working with today? A, yes, B, no, or C, uncertain.
So far, it looks like Bs are the majority.
Yeah. And by the way, that would be consistent. We just gave this presentation in a nonprofit more for practitioners within their companies. And that was similar. We had a lot of people that needed, but then there was a steep drop off to are you ready, like realistically today. So as these responses come in, given that it's a similar fact pattern to what we've been seeing as we give these presentations, if you have any questions, remember, there's no such thing as a stupid question. If you have any questions, we will put our email addresses at the end of this presentation. Do not hesitate to reach out. We definitely want to help. And we have also, as a function of these presentations, we are able to PDF this. I don't know if the organization that's sponsoring this gives that away, but once again, we are able to provide this thought leadership. Once again, if you have any questions, given that you need to be compliant and you're not ready, we're definitely able to help, right? We want to make sure we offer that olive branch. Yeah.
So there is one more question that we have here. Are flow down requirements required for FC1 Level 1 CMMC?
If you're flowing down federal contract information, then yes.
So think of it this way. If you're working with some sort of information that is controlled, if that information goes somewhere else, you are still responsible for it. So it needs to flow down, and that individual or company that's interacting with it also needs to be compliant. Eric, is that a fair summary?
Yep, well said, Carl.
Perfect. All right. Last but not least, whether you're CMMC or not, right? If you want to be compliant for cybersecurity, we do recommend a 12-step process. Before I walk through this, you're going to see step 12. The last step is the last step for a reason. All too often, we see companies want to do the penetration testing first. If you haven't assessed, remediated, and input controls, of course, they're going to get in, right? So conceptually, we want to assess input controls. Then we want to test to see if there are any gaps that we missed with the penetration testing. So I wanted to start there as a matter of transparency. But how do we start, right? We want to start with the maturity level assessment first, right? Where we're measuring our score, our maturity, develop our plan of action, right? Think remediation plan. So then we can report that via SPURS. Next step, we want to make sure we have our information security committee. That's your ongoing governance. Once again, top down, we need to be governing and addressing risk from a top-down manner in order to enforce compliance throughout the organization. We need to have our written security policies. Once again, that's mandated. Whether you're CMMC or not, you need to have written information security policies and procedures. We want to make sure we're giving the right awareness training, right, for those so they understand what CUI is and make sure they know how to handle it, and just basic cybersecurity hygiene training as well. We want to make sure we're implementing our controls to meet NIST 800-171, or depending on your level, right? We mentioned what the incremental lifts are. And we want to make sure, to the extent we can automate those, fantastic. That's going to reduce. We heard the question of ongoing compliance cost. If we can automate things, we're going to do this cheaper. And then we need to report on progress to make sure that we're once again in compliance. And if we're not, that we're addressing it. To the extent we can centralize things, once again, we could become more efficient. Everything from our testing, policies, risk assessments, logs, reporting. Once again, centralization is going to be key. One gold source of information. We should have some method or capability to monitor 24/7 via Security Operations Center, which is called a SOC. Once again, so if there's an incident, that we can detect it, we can flag it, and then we can start investigation and escalation remediation throughout the organization. We should be assessing our ongoing vulnerability management and remediation, looking at those CVEs, right, as they're released. We should be having IDS, or intrusion detection and prevention software, right, to protect our CUI. Goes without saying, whether it's CMMC or not, you should have that. We need to have an incident response plan. So when the worst case does happen, it's typically a matter of when, not if, that we're able to respond accordingly. Once again, there are a lot of statistics on incident response plans. If you do have an effective plan that's tested and socialized in an organization, the cost of incidents does go down pretty significantly. So that's important. Once again, the next one here, we should have a cyber liability insurance policy. So if you think about risk, we like to call it a three-legged stool, right? I can accept risk, which is very expensive and probably it's illegal with CMMC, right? I can mitigate risk, right? Where I need to mitigate risk to an acceptable level, of which CMMC provides a minimum. And then I can transfer some of that residual risk, right? Understanding that it's probably a when and not if, right? I should transfer some of that liability to an insurer. And then, as I mentioned earlier, right, the last thing we do when we're done with steps 1 through 11, we'll try to do a penetration test to see if we can get in, to see if there's anything that we missed. Eric, anything that I missed?
You did great, Carl. Well done.
All right. Perfect. Which leads me to the last slide. If I can get it to go to the last slide. Wanted to say thank you for the invitation. I mentioned if there's any questions, there's no such thing as a stupid question if you need help, right? We did notice that there's a high drop off from yes, I need to be versus yes, I'm ready. We want to make sure that we offer assistance. We're here to help, even if it's just a quick question over email. So I wanted to make sure that we offered that to the audience. We will provide this deck. And once again, thank you. Eric, I'll let you say thank you as well.
Thank you, Carl. And I'd like to thank our cyber practice leader, Bob Green, for allowing us to be here today.
Bob, by the way, he is not a presenter today, but the magic that does not happen without Bob Green. So once again, thank you, Bob.
I'm just going to say thank you back. Good work, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for, by the way, thank you for
sitting
through this too.
Oh, yeah. No, I want to thank Heather and also Andrea and the team from our BSG group for providing such great sponsorship with us and collaboration. So thank you so much, everybody. And to the attendees, thanks for your interest in this. It's an important area.
Well said, Bob.
All right. Well, perfect. Well, on that note, thank you all once again. Any questions, feel free to reach out. We're here.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you, Carl,
Thank you all.
Eric, Bob. We really appreciate you all attending today. And we will be sending out a follow-up email, which will include the slide deck, the CPA, if anybody is interested, and also a recording. We usually send a link to the recording, so you can reference back to it if you'd like.
Thanks
Great.
again.
Andrea, is there anything
Thanks,
else you'd like
everybody.
to add?
Oh, well, we
Thank
were
you
going
all.
to ask Bill to talk about NCMA and the benefits
Okay.
of membership. I did put a link in the chat. Bill, are you still on the call?
I am on the call. Can you hear me okay?
We're having trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me now? Hang on.
Yeah, we're having trouble hearing you, but yeah, we would just like to recommend that everyone join NCMA if you're not currently a member. It's a very cost effective, and there's a lot of networking, training, and collaboration that goes on there. So if you're not a member, look for your local member. I did put the link to the website in the chat, and then I think Kim was just going to talk for a quick minute about our SingerLewak Business Solutions group, and I put a link for that in the chat as well. Kim, are you?
I'm here.
Okay.
So I just wanted to let those of you that are still here know my name is Kim. I'm a partner at SingerLewak in the Business Solutions group, and we do have a specialty in accounting for clients that have contracts with the federal government. We help clients with everything from their month-end accounting through to voucher preparation, provisional burden rate requests, ICE reports at year end. We've got experience and staff with experience in all of that. So if you find you need any help with that end of your business, we can help with that. We have our business informatics team can help you with what was discussed today. So we have a wide range of services we can help with. So please feel free to reach out to any of us. It's all yours, Heather.
And thank you, Carl and Eric. That was a great presentation, and everyone's heads are spinning, I'm sure.
Appreciate
Thank you for
the
having
invite.
us.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right,
Bye for
thank
now.
you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.